cameras, an alarm system, a locked door. None of it mattered. On the last night of January, an 84-year-old woman was dropped off at her home in Tucson, Arizona. Her garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. That is the last confirmed moment anyone saw her. By the next morning, she was gone. Not missing in the way people go missing. Gone in a way that made investigators use a different word almost immediately: abducted. And months later, the man leading the investigation would say something that should worry all of us. Not just the people trying to solve this case. That the one piece of video that might have shown exactly what happened that night may already be gone, deleted, not by a killer covering his tracks, by the camera itself, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Stick with me for the next few minutes, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand something most people don't. How close we came to solving this case in the first 10 days, and the specific, mundane, bureaucratic reason we might never get that chance again. This is the case of Nancy Guthrie, mother of Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, a case that pulled in the FBI, a $50,000 reward ransom notes worth millions of dollars, and a masked man caught on camera, but somehow still no suspect, 5 months later. We're going to walk through exactly what happened, hour by hour, using only what investigators and reporters have actually confirmed. No speculation, no theories, just the timeline as it happened. And then we're going to focus on the one detail almost nobody is talking about, the 4 days that may have cost this case its most important piece of evidence. If you want to understand how a modern investigation can lose critical evidence without anyone breaking a single law, this is that story. Who is Nancy Guthrie? To understand why this case became national news within hours, you have to understand who Nancy Guthrie's daughter is. Savannah Guthrie co-anchors NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognized faces in American morning television. Nancy also has 2 other children, her daughter Annie, who lives in Tucson, and her son Cameron. At 84, Nancy lived alone in the Catalina foothills, an upscale, quiet stretch of Tucson at the base of the mountains. The kind of neighborhood where nothing happens, which is exactly why what happened here felt so disorienting to everyone who knew her. She wasn't isolated, she kept a close relationship with her children, a steady routine, and a religious practice. She attended virtual church services almost every Sunday without fail. That detail matters more than it sounds like it should, because the first sign that something was wrong wasn't a scream, or a struggle, or a 911 call from inside the house. It was silence, a church service she never missed, that she simply didn't show up for. Here's exactly how that last night unfolded, according to the timeline the Pima County Sheriff's Department later released to the public. At 5:32 in the evening, Nancy took a rideshare to her daughter Annie's home for dinner. Investigators spoke to the driver directly afterward. There was nothing unusual about the trip, nothing that in hindsight hinted at what was coming. The evening went the way family dinners do, ordinary, unremarkable. Then, at around 9:45, her family drove her home. 9:48, the garage door opens. 9:50, it closes. That's it. That 2-minute window is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie. After that, based on everything investigators have pieced together since, she was alone in that house. And what happened over the next 4 hours is where this case stops being simple. Thanks to a detailed timeline the Sheriff's Department eventually released, we know almost exactly what happened next, minute by minute. At 1:47 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera disconnected. 25 minutes later, 2:12 a.m., the camera's own software detected motion, a person in frame. But here's the problem. There is no surviving video of it. According to the sheriff, the camera wasn't tied to a paid cloud subscription, which means instead of saving footage permanently, it simply recorded over itself in a loop, again and again and again, to make room for new recordings. Whatever that motion alert captured didn't survive long enough for a single human being to see it. 16 minutes after that, 2:28 a.m., a third alert. Nancy wore a pacemaker connected by an app to her phone, constantly transmitting data in real time. At 2:28, that connection dropped. 3 data points: a disconnected camera, a motion alert with no surviving footage. a medical device going silent, all within the same 41-minute window in the middle of the night. And for the next 8.5 hours, nothing. No alarm, no call, no sign to the outside world that anything was wrong. It wasn't until nearly 11 o'clock that morning, when a fellow churchgoer noticed Nancy hadn't shown up for the service she never missed, that anyone started asking questions. A call went out to the family. At 11:56, relatives arrived at the house and found her gone. 7 minutes later, they called 911. When deputies got there, what they found on the front porch would change how this entire case was classified. This was not a break-in. The doors were locked. Nothing was ransacked. Nothing dramatic was out of place, which honestly made it more unsettling, not less. Except for one thing: blood on the front porch. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Nancy. Investigators haven't publicly said whether blood was found anywhere else on the property. But that single detail was enough to shift the entire framing of the case, from a missing person to what the sheriff would call, in plain language, an abduction. At a press conference days later, the sheriff told the public directly, this was not a woman who left on her own. Within hours, this quiet neighborhood would be transformed into the site of one of the largest search operations Tucson had seen in years. Ground teams and cadaver dogs moved through the desert surrounding the Catalina foothills. Drones and helicopters swept the terrain from above. Infrared cameras scanned for heat signatures through the night. The FBI's involvement expanded fast. Agents, digital forensic specialists, and crisis negotiators, some flown out from the FBI's training center at Quantico. A $50,000 reward went up for information leading to Nancy's recovery or an arrest. Hundreds of law enforcement personnel were now working a single case. And yet, for all of that manpower, the most basic question of all remained completely out of reach. Where is she? That question was about to get a lot more complicated, because this is the point where the case stopped looking like a straightforward abduction and started looking like a hostage negotiation. Multiple ransom notes began circulating, demanding millions of dollars, reportedly in Bitcoin, for Nancy's safe return. Just 3 days after she vanished, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings, Annie and Cameron, released the first of several video statements. They confirmed they were aware of the ransom reports in the media. They said they were ready to communicate, but in a world where images and voices can be manipulated, they needed proof, beyond doubt, that their mother was alive and that whoever was contacting them actually had her. Sit with that for a second. The family wasn't just afraid for Nancy. They were afraid of being deceived by whoever was reaching out to them. 5 days in, a deadline set in one of the ransom letters, 5 o'clock in the evening, came and went. No confirmed contact. A second note arrived days later. This one claimed Nancy Guthrie had already died. Investigators have since raised serious doubts about whether these notes were ever authentic. Reporting from Reuters later cast doubt on their credibility entirely. And in a separate, almost surreal twist, someone else was arrested for sending a completely unrelated, phony ransom demand of their own. Which tells you something important about a case like this once it goes public. The noise can become almost as overwhelming as the crime itself. On February 10th, 9 days after Nancy disappeared, investigators released what the sheriff would later call the single biggest clue to surface in the entire case. Doorbell camera footage and still images of a masked man, average build, somewhere between 5'9" and 5'10". In the images, he's wearing a face mask, gloves, and what was identified as a black Ozark Trail hiking backpack. In at least one frame, he appears to be carrying a holstered handgun. And here's a detail worth pausing on. One of the photos, the one without the backpack, wasn't even from the night she disappeared. It was captured the day before. The image with the backpack is from the morning of February 1st itself, the same morning she missed church. For the first time, the public had something to watch for. But here's the part almost nobody talks about, and it's the reason this case may never be solved. If investigators eventually recovered footage of a masked man, why did it take 9 full days? And more importantly, what didn't survive long enough to be recovered at all? According to FBI Director Kash Patel, in comments made directly to Fox News Digital, the Bureau wasn't brought into this investigation immediately. There was a 4-day delay before the FBI was formally looped in. That delay, Patel said, may have cost investigators crucial video evidence. Here's why that matters, in plain terms. Nancy Guthrie's Nest doorbell camera wasn't on a paid cloud subscription. Without that subscription, the camera doesn't permanently save anything. It caches footage temporarily, then automatically overwrites it, over and over, to make room for new recordings. It's not built to preserve evidence, it's built to save storage space. And by the time the FBI got involved, working with Google to try to recover whatever remained in that cache, they were racing a clock that had already been running for days. Patel described the search himself, telling Fox News they were looking for, quote, the needle of all needles in all haystacks, because since the camera wasn't paying for that storage, the data simply wasn't being recorded the way investigators needed it to be. What they did manage to pull from that cache became the footage released on February 10th, the masked man, the backpack, the timestamps. But Patel has acknowledged something sobering. There may have been more, additional footage that existed briefly in that cache, and vanished before the FBI ever got the chance to see it. If it existed, its evidentiary value will now never be known, not because someone destroyed it, because nobody got there in time. Morgan Wright, who runs the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, put it plainly to Fox News. The earlier an investigation starts working digital evidence, the better the odds of recovering it. Waiting days, he said, may have been fatal to recovering footage that could have told investigators far more than what actually survived. This isn't a story about a criminal outsmarting the system. It's a story about how quickly local and federal agencies coordinate, or don't, when every single hour is evidence, quite literally, expiring in real time. And that 4-day gap may have closed a door that can never, ever be reopened. Like most high-profile investigations, this one has had its false starts too. Roughly 60 miles south of Tucson, in the border town of Rio Rico, a man was detained during a traffic stop and briefly treated as a person of interest. He was released hours later, without charges. The man later identified himself publicly, saying he worked as a delivery driver and had no knowledge of Nancy's disappearance. He said law enforcement had reportedly been following his vehicle before the stop. Investigators searched both the car and a connected property, wrapping up around 1 in the morning. It was the first search of a property that didn't belong to Nancy or her daughter Annie, and it led nowhere. As of the most recent reporting, no suspects have been formally named in this case. Nearly half a year after her mother disappeared, Savannah Guthrie sat down with her colleague and friend, Hoda Kotbul, for her first interview since the case began. She shared something that had clearly been weighing on her, the possibility that her own public profile, her own fame, might be the reason someone targeted her mother in the first place. She described that thought as almost too much to bear, and she said simply that if that's what happened, she was sorry. Despite everything, Savannah returned to the Today Show while the search for her mother continued in the background, a public figure carrying an intensely private grief in front of millions of viewers every single morning. And the case itself kept evolving. Nearly 5 months in, the FBI found itself addressing new doubts about whether those original ransom notes were ever credible at all. So let's lay out exactly where this stands, right now. Here's what we know for certain. Nancy Guthrie was last seen the night of January 31st. Her home showed every sign of an abduction, not a voluntary disappearance. Her blood was confirmed on her own front porch. Ransom notes were sent, though their authenticity is now seriously in question. One piece of doorbell footage survived, showing a masked man in a backpack on the morning she vanished. And to this day, no suspect has been charged. And here's what we don't know. What, if anything, existed in the footage lost before the FBI got involved? Who the man in that surviving footage actually is? And, most painfully of all, whether Nancy Guthrie is still alive. This case is still open. The FBI's tip line remains active, and the $50,000 reward still stands for anyone with information that helps bring Nancy Guthrie home, or brings whoever is responsible to justice. If you actually have information about this case, this video isn't the place for it. Contact the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department directly, using the information on screen right now. For the rest of us, If this raised a question in your mind about how much of your own life is being recorded, cached, and quietly overwritten by devices you don't fully control, that's a question worth sitting with. This case is a reminder of exactly how fragile that digital record really is. Thank you for watching. If you want to be the first to know the moment this case actually breaks, subscribe and turn on notifications. I follow these cases until they're solved. I'd rather bring you the real update late than a fake one early.